How did a joke about my allergy end with a promotion committee turning against the man who smiled while trying to sabotage me? What started as a casual meeting drink became the moment I understood why my coworker wanted me out of the room permanently. I let him believe his plan worked, and then watched the system he trusted dismantle him instead. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. My name is Cole Harlow, I am 38 years old, and I have spent the last 11 years working as a senior network infrastructure specialist at one of the largest internet service providers in the region. I am good at my job. I say this without arrogance, because arrogance requires acknowledgement from others, and in my case, that acknowledgement has been notably absent. The open plan office floor where I spend most of my waking hours is a study in corporate architecture designed to suggest collaboration while fostering competition. Rows of desks stretch toward floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city. The morning light catches the dust motes floating between monitors, and the hum of cooling fans creates a white noise that most people stop noticing after their first week. I still notice it. I notice everything. My desk sits in what the facilities team calls Infrastructure Corner, a cluster of workstations near the server monitoring room, far enough from the executive suites that we are rarely bothered, close enough to the break room that we hear every conversation that happens there. This positioning has been both a professional limitation and an unexpected advantage. That Monday morning in October, I arrived at 7:15, as I always do. The office was mostly empty except for the overnight operations team wrapping up their shift and a few early risers who, like me, preferred the quiet hours before the noise began. I set my coffee on my desk, black from the place on 3rd Street that roasts their own beans, and logged into the monitoring dashboard. 3 minor alerts overnight. A router in the northwest sector had flagged a temperature warning at 2:47 a.m., resolved automatically when the backup cooling kicked in. A bandwidth spike at 4:12, traced to a scheduled backup that someone had forgotten to document, and a brief connectivity hiccup at 5:30 that lasted 43 seconds and affected approximately 1,200 customers. I documented all 3, cross-referenced the logs, and sent a summary report to the operations inbox before anyone else had even arrived. This is what I do. This is what I've always done. By 8:30, the office had filled with the usual morning energy, people greeting each other, coffee machines humming, keyboards clicking. I kept my head down, focused on a capacity planning report that was due by end of week. The numbers told a story that management would not want to hear. We needed infrastructure upgrades that would cost money, and the budget cycle had already closed. "Morning, Cole." I looked up. Oliver Finch from the engineering team stood at the edge of my desk, holding a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who had been sent on an errand he did not particularly want to complete. "Morning, Oliver. Have you seen the email about the final promotion review?" I had. The calendar invite had arrived on Friday afternoon, timed perfectly to ensure it would sit in everyone's inbox over the weekend, generating anxiety and speculation. 2 candidates for the senior operations leadership position. One of them was me, the other was Ethan Crowe. "I saw it," I said. Oliver nodded slowly, his eyes drifting toward the cluster of desks where Ethan usually held court. "Just wanted to make sure you knew. Some people are already talking about it being a done deal." "Are they?" "Ethan's been meeting with Victor Langston pretty regularly. Informal stuff, from what I hear. Coffee, that kind of thing." I saved my document and turned fully to face Oliver. He was a decent man, the kind who noticed things and occasionally felt compelled to share them. Not out of malice, but out of some sense of fairness that had not yet been beaten out of him by corporate life. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "Just thought you should know where things stand." He glanced around, lowered his voice slightly. "For what it is worth, your work speaks for itself, but speaking and being heard are 2 different things around here." He walked away before I could respond, which was probably for the best. I did not have a response prepared. The break room kitchenette was a small space adjacent to the main office floor, equipped with the standard corporate amenities: a coffee machine that produced something technically qualifying as coffee, a refrigerator covered in passive-aggressive notes about food theft, and a microwave that smelled permanently of reheated fish despite the laminated sign explicitly forbidding seafood. I went there at 10:15, as I always do, to refill my water bottle. Hydration is important. It is one of the many small disciplines that keep me functional. Ethan Crowe was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug in his hand, surrounded by 3 people I recognized from the sales team. He was telling a story. Ethan was always telling stories, and the small audience was laughing at all the right moments. He was 34 years old, 4 years younger than me, and had been with the company for 6 years. In that time, he had risen from network analyst to operations manager through a combination of genuine competence, strategic visibility, and an instinct for saying exactly what people wanted to hear. He was good-looking in a conventional way, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that made people want to agree with him. I walked past the group toward the water cooler, invisible as always. "Hey, Cole!" Ethan's voice cut through the laughter, friendly in a way that somehow felt like a challenge. "How are you holding up?" I stopped, turned. "Fine. Why?" "Just checking in. You know, with the review coming up. Big week for both of us." He smiled, and there was something in that smile that I could not quite identify. "You feeling okay? No flare-ups or anything?" The sales team members glanced at each other, uncertain. "I am fine," I said. Good. Just want to make sure our infrastructure specialist is in top shape. Cannot have you collapsing before the big meeting, right?" Another smile. Another layer of meaning I was apparently supposed to decode. I filled my water bottle and left without responding. Behind me, I heard someone ask Ethan what he meant by flare-ups, and I heard him say something about allergies and high maintenance in a tone that suggested sympathy while actually conveying dismissal. My allergy. The one I disclosed formally during my onboarding process 11 years ago, the one that was documented in my personnel file, acknowledged by HR, and essentially forgotten by everyone except, apparently, Ethan Crowe. I sat at my desk and stared at my monitoring dashboard without seeing it. The router temperature alert from overnight blinked in the corner of the screen, resolved and logged, a small problem that had been handled quietly and efficiently. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. But Ethan was right about one thing. It was going to be a big week. The meeting invite arrived at 2:47 that afternoon, just as I was finishing my capacity report. A new calendar item, separate from the formal promotion review. Casual drink before the final review, Ethan and Cole. The message body was simple. "Hey, Cole. Thought it might be good to clear the air before things get official. No hard feelings either way, right? Meet at Brennan's at 7. First round is on me. E. Brennan's was a downtown bar that the company used for informal events. Holiday gatherings, retirement celebrations, that sort of thing. Neutral territory, in theory. I stared at the invitation for a long moment. The cursor blinked in the response field, waiting. Then I clicked accept. The parking garage beneath our building was a concrete cavern that smelled of exhaust and dampness, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I went there at 5:15 to sit in my car for a few minutes before heading to the bar. This was a ritual I had developed over the years, a buffer between work and everything else, a chance to let the day settle before I had to engage with the world again. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, watching the other cars leave one by one. Most people could not wait to escape this place. I understood the impulse, even if I did not share it. For me, the office was predictable. The problems were technical, solvable, documented. The politics were unpleasant, but they followed patterns that could be observed and analyzed. People like Ethan relied on those patterns without understanding them. They saw the surface, the meetings, the handshakes, the strategic coffees with the CTO, and assumed that was where the real action happened. They were not entirely wrong, but they were not entirely right either. I started the car and drove toward downtown, toward the bar where Ethan Crowe was waiting with a drink that had my name on it. The drive to Brennan's took 12 minutes through the late afternoon traffic. I used the time to think, which is something I do often. Too often, according to my ex-wife, who left 4 years ago because she said I was always somewhere else even when I was physically present. She was not wrong. The streets slid past my windows, office buildings giving way to restaurants and retail, the transition zone between corporate and commercial that defined this part of the city. I knew these blocks well. I had mapped them in my mind over years of driving the same routes, noting the small changes that accumulated over time. A new coffee shop where a bookstore used to be, a parking lot that became a construction site that became a condominium tower. Ethan Crowe had been with the company for 6 years. In that time, I had watched him climb with the kind of focused ambition that I recognized but did not share. He understood something that I had always struggled with, that in corporate environments, perception often mattered more than reality. I pulled into a parking spot 2 blocks from the bar and sat for a moment, thinking about the pattern. There was a pattern. There was always a pattern. I first noticed it 3 years ago, during the infrastructure crisis that nearly brought down our entire regional network. A firmware bug in our core routers had caused cascading failures across multiple nodes, affecting thousands of customers and generating the kind of headlines that made executives nervous. I had been the one who identified the bug. I had been the one who developed the patch. I had been the one who stayed awake for 37 consecutive hours testing and implementing the fix while everyone else went home to sleep. And when the crisis was over, when the network was stable again, When the post-mortem meeting was held to discuss what had happened and how it had been resolved, Ethan Crowe had been the one presenting the timeline to the senior leadership team. I remembered sitting in that meeting, watching him walk through the slides I had prepared, explaining the technical details I had documented, accepting the acknowledgement I had earned. He thanked me at the end. Couldn't have done it without Cole's support, and the room had moved on to the next agenda item. That was when I started keeping records. Not obsessively, not vindictively, just carefully. I began documenting my contributions in ways that existed independently of the official reporting structure. Time-stamped emails to myself, screenshots of monitoring logs with my name attached, copies of the incident reports that showed who had actually been in the building when the problems occurred. It was not revenge, it was insurance. I had not known back then what I would eventually need that insurance for, but I had known, with the quiet certainty that comes from watching patterns repeat themselves, that I would need it eventually. The bar was half full when I arrived. Happy hour crowd, mostly. People from the surrounding offices unwinding after a day of meetings and emails and the small frustrations of corporate existence. The lighting was dim and warm, designed to make everyone look better and drink more, and the background music was the kind of inoffensive rock that no one really listened to. Ethan was sitting at a table near the back, 2 drinks already in front of him. He waved when he saw me, that broad, easy smile spreading across his face. "Cole, glad you could make it." He stood partially, a gesture of welcome that somehow felt rehearsed. I took the liberty of ordering. "You still drink bourbon, right?" I did not recall ever telling Ethan what I drank, but I sat down across from him and nodded, because the path of least resistance was often the most informative one. "Thanks for setting this up," I said, reaching for the glass. Then I stopped. The smell hit me before my hand touched the drink. Faint, but unmistakable. Almond. Not bourbon. Bourbon does not smell like almond. Something had been added. Something I recognized with the kind of visceral certainty that comes from years of careful vigilance. Tree nuts, my allergen. The one documented in my personnel file, acknowledged by HR, disclosed formally during onboarding. I looked at the glass. I looked at Ethan. He was watching me with an expression of casual interest, his own drink already in his hand. Waiting. I had heard stories about things like this. Office rivalries that escalated beyond the usual backstabbing and turned into something uglier. People who decided that winning was not enough, that their competition had to lose in a way that was permanent and unmistakable. But I had never thought I would be sitting across from someone who had decided to do this to me. For a moment, I considered confronting him directly, demanding to know what he had put in my drink, watching him scramble to explain himself, caught in a trap of his own making. But that was not the pattern. That was not how these things worked. Ethan had chosen this bar because it was familiar territory. He had chosen this timing because the promotion review was 2 days away. He had chosen me because he thought I was predictable, invisible, too passive to fight back. He was right about almost everything. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I think I'm going to switch to beer. Long day, need something lighter." A flicker of something crossed Ethan's face. Disappointment? Frustration? It was gone before I could identify it. "Sure, of course." He flagged down a server, ordered me a bottle of the house lager. When it arrived, I watched him watch me take the first sip. And we talked for an hour. Ethan was charming and expansive, telling stories about projects he had managed, challenges he had overcome, visions he had for the department. I listened and nodded and contributed just enough to seem engaged. The untouched bourbon sat between us the entire time, condensation forming on the glass. When we finally parted ways, handshake, backslap, promises to do this again sometime, I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that felt like clarity, sharp and cold and strangely energizing. I took out my phone, opened the camera, photographed the receipt the server had left on the table before Ethan could grab it. Noted the time, 7:47 p.m. Noted the date, noted everything. Then I drove home, and I began to plan. The apartment where I lived was a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building that had been converted from an old warehouse. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of place that real estate agents called character and that I called quiet. I sat at my desk, a repurposed dining table covered in monitors and cables, sabam, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness of my apartment, the only light. My personnel file was accessible through the company portal, though most people never bothered to look at it. I navigated to the section on medical disclosures and found what I was looking for, the document I had signed 11 years ago, listing my allergy, signed by the HR representative who had processed my onboarding. I screenshot it, saved it, moved on. The email archives took longer to search. I was looking for specific exchanges, messages confirming that my allergy was documented, reminders about accommodation policies, anything that established a clear paper trail. I found 3 relevant emails, one from HR acknowledging my disclosure, one from my direct manager at the time, now retired, confirming that the information had been noted in my file, and one from the company-wide safety coordinator sent to all employees, reminding everyone of the policy regarding allergens in the office. That last email had been sent 6 months ago. Ethan had been on the distribution list. He knew. He had known all along. I saved everything to a folder on my desktop, labeled with a date and a name, Documentation, October 2024. Then I opened a new email, addressed to myself, and began to write. The next morning was a Tuesday. I went through my normal routine. Alarm at 6, shower, coffee, the drive through light traffic to the nearly empty office. But nothing about it felt normal. The encounter at the bar had changed something fundamental in the way I understood my situation. For years, I had accepted the low-level disrespect as simply the cost of doing business in an environment that valued visibility over competence. I had told myself that the work mattered, that the results spoke for themselves, that eventually the right people would notice. Now I understood that Ethan Crowe was not simply competing with me for the promotion. He was trying to remove me from consideration entirely. The security guard in the lobby, a man named Raymond who had been working the front desk for as long as I could remember, nodded as I badged through. "Early one again, Mr. Harlow?" "Always, Raymond." He smiled. People like Raymond understood the value of consistency. They saw who showed up and who did not, who took the work seriously and who merely performed seriousness for an audience. The server monitoring room was my first stop, as always. The room was climate-controlled, cooler than the rest of the office, filled with the steady hum of machines doing their quiet, essential work. I checked the overnight logs, verified that nothing had escalated during the hours I was away, and prepared my morning summary. Then I did something I had never done before. I pulled a chair into the corner of the room, sat down, and looked at the ceiling. There it was, the small dark dome of a security camera positioned to capture the entrance and the primary server racks. I had noticed it years ago and filed it away as unremarkable. This was a secure area, of course there would be cameras. But now I was thinking about other cameras, the ones in the bar, the ones in the parking garage, the ones positioned at every entrance and exit of this building, recording everything that happened, creating a timeline of movements that could theoretically be reconstructed if someone knew what to look for. The bar we had been at last night was a location the company used for events. That meant there was probably a relationship between Brennan's and the company's facilities team. That meant there might be security footage. That meant there might be a record of exactly what Ethan had done. I wrote myself another email, detailing what I remembered about the camera positions in the bar. Then I went back to my desk and started my normal workday. Oliver Finch stopped by again around 10 o'clock, and tablet in hand, the same uncertain expression on his face. "Heard you had drinks with Ethan last night," he said. Small office. Small world. Nothing stayed secret for long. News travels fast. He was telling people about it this morning. Said you guys cleared the air, no hard feelings, may the best man win, that kind of thing. Is that what he said? Oliver glanced around, lowered his voice. He also said you seemed off, distracted. Said he's worried about you handling the stress of the promotion process. Of course he did. I am handling it fine, I said. I believe you, just thought you should know what he's saying. Oliver hesitated, seemed to weigh something internally. Look, Cole, I've been here long enough to see how things work. The people who get ahead are not always the people who deserve to. But sometimes the system corrects itself. Sometimes the truth comes out. I nodded slowly. Sometimes it does. He left, and I sat staring at my monitoring dashboard, thinking about what he had said. The truth. As if truth were some kind of natural force that operated independently of human action, revealing itself on its own schedule. The truth did not come out by itself. The truth was brought out by people who had the patience to gather it and the willingness to present it. I had always been patient. I opened my email and began drafting a message to the facilities department. I framed it as a general inquiry about security protocols, the kind of routine administrative question that probably crossed their desks a dozen times a week. I asked about camera coverage in areas used for company events, explaining that I was working on a risk assessment for an upcoming project. It was not entirely a lie. I was assessing risk, just not the kind of risk they would assume. The response came within 2 hours. Yes, the company maintained security agreements with several off-site venues used for events. Yes, footage was retained for a standard period of 90 days. Yes, requests for footage review could be submitted through the standard security request process. I saved the email, another piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, I did something that felt strange even as I was doing it. I walked into the HR department and asked to speak with Marianne Doyle. Marianne was the HR compliance officer, a woman in her early 50s who had been with the company longer than almost anyone. She had the weary patience of someone who had seen every possible variation of office conflict and had long ago stopped being surprised by human behavior. "Cole," she said, looking up from her computer, "what can I do for you?" I wanted to confirm that my medical disclosure information is still current in my personnel file, just making sure everything is documented correctly. She nodded slowly, turned to her screen, clicked through several menus. "Yes, it is all here. Allergy to tree nuts. Disclosed at onboarding. Accommodation noted. Is there an issue?" "No issue. Just wanted to make sure the documentation was in order." I thanked her and left, conscious of her eyes following me as I walked away. She was wondering why I had come. Why now? What had prompted someone who rarely visited HR to suddenly care about the status of a disclosure made more than a decade ago? Let her wonder. Let it be on record that I had been here, that I had asked the question, that the documentation was confirmed as current. The puzzle was taking shape, one piece at a time. That evening, I went back to Brennan's. Not inside. I was not ready for that yet. I parked across the street and watched the entrance for 20 minutes, noting the camera positions, the angle of coverage, the flow of customers coming and going. The bar was busy again, happy hour crowd spilling onto the sidewalk, laughter and conversation carrying through the evening air. A security camera was mounted above the entrance, pointed toward the sidewalk. Another inside, visible through the window, covering the main bar area. A third, possibly, near the back where we had been sitting. I could not be certain without going inside, but the coverage pattern suggested that the angle might have captured our table. I took photos of the building exterior, noting the camera positions. I wrote down the time, 6:23 p.m. I documented everything. Then I drove to the nearest walk-in medical clinic. The clinic was mostly empty, a few patients waiting with minor complaints, a bored receptionist scrolling through her phone, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I signed in, waited my turn, and eventually found myself sitting in a small examination room explaining to a nurse practitioner why I was there. "I'm not currently experiencing symptoms," I said, "but I wanted to establish a documented record of my allergy status. I had a possible exposure last night, and I want to make sure my medical records reflect the situation." The nurse practitioner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, typed notes into her tablet. "Can you describe the possible exposure?" I explained about the drink at the bar. The smell of almonds, the decision not to consume it, the concern that someone might have deliberately introduced an allergen without my knowledge. She listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and eventually printed out a form that documented my description of the evening and my allergy status. I signed it. She signed it. A copy went into my medical file. Another piece of the puzzle. In the car afterward, I sat in the dark and let myself feel the full weight of what I was doing. I was building a case. I was preparing for a confrontation that I had not yet decided how to initiate. I was methodically constructing a timeline that would show exactly what had happened, documented from multiple sources, verified by multiple authorities. It was not revenge. It was protection. The distinction mattered. My phone buzzed. A text message, sender unknown. One line. "Looking forward to the meeting Thursday. May the best man win. Ethan." Of course. I turned off my phone and drove home. Wednesday was a day of waiting and preparation. The promotion review was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, a closed-door session with the evaluation committee that would determine which of us, Ethan or me, would be recommended for the senior operations leadership position. I spent the morning at my desk, working through my normal tasks with the focused efficiency that had defined my career. Network monitoring, capacity planning, incident documentation, the quiet essential work that kept everything running while others took credit for more visible contributions. But part of my mind was elsewhere, organizing the evidence, refining the timeline, preparing for what I knew was coming. At 10 o'clock, I received an email from the facilities department confirming that my security footage request had been logged. They would need additional authorization to release footage from off-site locations, but the process was underway. Estimated response time, 3 to 5 business days. Too late for the Thursday meeting, but not too late for what would come after. I saved the email and continued working. Oliver Finch stopped by around lunchtime, carrying 2 sandwiches from the cafe across the street. "Figured you could use some food," he said, setting one on my desk. "You have been looking pretty intense lately." Appreciate it. He sat in the empty chair next to my desk, unwrapped his own sandwich, and began eating in companionable silence. After a few minutes, he spoke again. Ethan has been talking to everyone this week. Meetings, coffee runs, that whole routine. It is like watching a political campaign. He is good at that. He is good at making people think he is good at that. There is a difference. Oliver took another bite, chewed thoughtfully. You know, most people do not notice the difference, but some of us do. I looked at him directly. What are you trying to tell me? I am trying to tell you that you are not as invisible as you think. People see who does the actual work around here. They see who shows up at 3 a.m. when the servers go down. They see who stays late and comes in early and never makes a fuss about any of it. And yet, that is not how promotions work. I know, it is not fair. He paused, seemed to be struggling with something. Look, I overheard something this morning. Ethan talking to someone from HR. He mentioned your name. He mentioned something about health concerns and whether the company should be considering candidates who might not be reliable. My hands tightened on my sandwich wrapper. He said that? Words to that effect. I do not know all the details, but it sounded like he was planting seeds. Of course he was. The drink at the bar was just one part of the strategy. If it had worked, if I had consumed the allergen and had a reaction, Ethan would have been there to express concern, to question my reliability, to wonder aloud whether someone with such serious health issues should be trusted with leadership responsibilities. And even though it had not worked, he was still pursuing the same narrative through other channels. Thank you for telling me, I said. Oliver nodded, finished his sandwich, and returned to his own desk. I spent the afternoon organizing. The email from HR confirming my disclosure, the screenshot of my personnel file, the documented timeline of the bar incident, the photos of the camera positions at Brennan's, the medical record from the clinic confirming my allergy and my description of the possible exposure, the email from facilities showing that security footage had been requested. I arranged everything in a folder on my laptop, ordered chronologically, labeled clearly. Then I created a backup on an external drive and put the drive in my laptop bag. At 4 o'clock, I sent one final email. This one was addressed to Marianne Doyle in HR with a subject line that was deliberately vague. Documentation for tomorrow's meeting. The body was simple. Marianne, I want to make sure you have a complete picture of recent events before the promotion review. I have documentation that I believe is relevant to the process and the integrity of the evaluation. I will bring the materials with me tomorrow. Please let me know if you have questions. Cole. I clicked send. Then I sat back and waited. The response came 20 minutes later. Cole, thank you for the heads up. Can you give me a sense of what the documentation relates to? Marianne, I typed carefully, choosing my words with precision. It relates to an incident that occurred Monday evening at a company-affiliated venue. It may have implications for how the committee considers the candidates. I would prefer to discuss in person rather than over email. I did not mention Ethan by name. I did not make accusations. I simply signaled that something had happened and that I had evidence. Marianne's response was immediate. Understood. I will make sure to speak with you before the review begins tomorrow. Thank you for bringing this forward. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for it to close. That evening, I went home and did something I had not done in years. I called my older sister, Janet, who lived in a different state and whom I had not spoken to in months. Cole? Her voice was surprised, concerned. Is everything okay? Everything is fine. I just wanted to talk. We spoke for 45 minutes, about nothing in particular, about family and memories and the small absurdities of everyday life. She asked about work, and I told her it was fine. She asked about my health, and I told her I was taking care of myself. I did not tell her about Ethan. I did not tell her about the drink. I did not tell her about what I was planning to do. Some things were better handled alone. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my apartment and thought about the morning, the meeting, the evidence, the confrontation that was coming. I was not angry. That was the surprising thing. I had expected to feel rage, or at least indignation at what Ethan had tried to do. But instead I felt calm, focused, clear. He had tried to harm me. He had tried to remove me from competition through deception and endangerment, and he had failed, not because I had confronted him, but because I had paid attention. Tomorrow, the system would do what the system was designed to do. It would respond to documented evidence of wrongdoing. It would protect itself from liability. It would remove the threat, not because it cared about justice, but because it cared about risk, and I would be there to watch it happen. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October day that made people walk faster and speak less. I dressed carefully, my best suit, a conservative tie, shoes polished to a mirror shine. The clothes were a kind of armor, signaling seriousness and competence to anyone who was paying attention. The drive to the office took the usual 12 minutes. I parked in my usual spot in the garage, badged through the usual turnstiles, nodded to Raymond at the front desk. Everything normal, everything precisely as it had always been, except that it was not. The promotion review was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I had 7 hours to wait. 7 hours of pretending that this was just another workday. 7 hours of quiet preparation for the confrontation to come. I spent the morning at my desk, working through my normal tasks. The monitoring dashboard showed green across the board. No incidents, no alerts, just the steady hum of systems running as they were designed to run. I documented the status, prepared my weekly reports, answered emails with careful precision. At 10:30, Marianne Doyle appeared at my desk. "Cole, can we speak privately?" I followed her to a small conference room near the HR suite, the kind of windowless space used for difficult conversations. She closed the door behind us and gestured toward a chair. "I received your email last night," she said. "I have been thinking about it since then. You mentioned an incident at a company-affiliated venue." "That is correct." "And you said you have documentation." I reached into my laptop bag and withdrew the folder I had prepared. "I do. Would you like to review it now, or would you prefer to wait until the meeting this afternoon?" Marianne looked at the folder, then at me. Her expression was carefully neutral, the professional mask of someone who had learned not to react until she had all the information. "Tell me what happened," she said. I told her. The drink at the bar, the smell of almonds, my decision not to consume it, the documentation I had gathered, the receipt, the timeline, the confirmation of my allergy disclosure, the security footage request. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded on the table in front of her. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This is a serious allegation," she said finally. "I am aware of that." "You are saying that another employee deliberately introduced an allergen into your beverage with the intention of causing you harm?" "I am saying that the documentation suggests that is what occurred. I am presenting the evidence and asking that the company investigate appropriately." Marianne nodded slowly. "I appreciate you bringing this forward. I will need to review the materials and consult with our legal team before the promotion review. This may affect the timing of the decision." "I understand." She took the folder from me, paged through the documents briefly, and stood. "Please return to your desk and continue your normal work. I will contact you when we are ready to proceed." I returned to the open floor and sat at my desk. The waiting continued. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. I watched the clock, watched my colleagues moving through their normal routines, watched Ethan Crowe circulating through the office with his usual confident energy, shaking hands, telling stories, positioning himself for the victory he assumed was coming. He did not know. He had no idea what was waiting for him behind that closed door. At 1:30, my phone buzzed. A message from Marianne. "Please report to Executive Conference Suite at 2 p.m. The format of today's meeting has been modified." I gathered my things and walked toward the elevator. The Executive Conference Suite was on the top floor, a space reserved for major client presentations and board meetings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the furniture was the kind of expensive minimalism that signaled serious money and serious power. When I arrived, several people were already seated around the long table. Marianne Doyle, Victor Langston, the CTU. A woman I did not recognize, middle-aged and sharp-eyed, with a legal pad in front of her, and 3 members of the promotion committee looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Ethan Crowe was not yet in the room. "Cole, please sit down," Victor said, gesturing to a chair near the end of the table. His voice was neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a wariness, an alertness, that told me he already knew something of what was coming. I sat. The door opened, and Ethan walked in, still wearing that confident smile. He glanced around the room, taking in the unfamiliar faces, the unexpected formality, the tension that hung in the air like static electricity. "Well," he said, "this is a bigger crowd than I expected. Are we celebrating already?" No one laughed. "Please have a seat, Ethan," Victor said. Ethan sat, his smile wavering slightly. He looked at me, and I saw the first flicker of doubt cross his face, the realization that something had changed, that the script he had rehearsed no longer applied. Marianne spoke first. "I am going to explain why the format of today's meeting has been modified. Earlier this morning, one of the candidates for the senior operations position brought forward documentation of an incident that occurred Monday evening at Brennan's bar. The incident involves a serious allegation of workplace misconduct." Ethan's expression shifted. The doubt deepened, sharpened into something closer to alarm. "What kind of allegation?" he asked. Marianne did not answer directly. Instead, she turned to me. Cole, would you please describe what happened at the bar on Monday evening? I described it calmly and methodically, without embellishment or emotion. The invitation, the drinks already ordered, the smell of almonds, my decision not to consume the beverage, the documentation I had gathered afterward. Ethan listened with growing agitation. This is ridiculous, he interrupted. I did not put anything in his drink. It was bourbon, just bourbon. He is making this up because he knows he is going to lose the promotion. The woman with the legal pad spoke for the first time. My name is Natalie Brooks. I am a legal consultant retained by the company. Mr. Crowe, I would advise you to listen to the full presentation of facts before making further statements. Ethan fell silent, his jaw tight. Marianne continued. We have obtained preliminary confirmation of several elements of Mr. Harlow's account. The bar receipt shows 2 drinks ordered at 7:12 p.m. on Monday. It's one bourbon with amaretto. Amaretto is an almond-flavored liqueur. She placed a copy of the receipt on the table. Ethan stared at it. Furthermore, our security team has expedited a review of camera footage from the bar. The footage shows Mr. Crowe switching the 2 glasses immediately after they were delivered to the table. She placed a printed still frame on the table. It was grainy but clear. Ethan's hands, 1 glass in each. The motion of exchange unmistakable. The room was very quiet. Mr. Harlow's allergy to tree nuts has been documented in his personnel file since his onboarding 11 years ago, Marianne continued. This information was communicated to all employees in a company-wide safety memo 6 months ago. The distribution list confirms that you, Mr. Crowe, received that memo. Another document on the table. Another piece of evidence. Ethan's face had gone pale. This is a misunderstanding. I did not mean... I was just trying to... It was a joke. A stupid joke. A joke that could have resulted in a serious anaphylactic reaction, Natalie Brooks said coolly. If Mr. Harlow had consumed that beverage, the consequences could have included hospitalization. The company's liability exposure is significant. Victor Langston spoke for the first time since the presentation began. Ethan, is there anything you want to say? Ethan looked around the room, at the documents on the table, at the faces of the committee members, at my calm, expressionless presence at the end of the table. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and said nothing. Based on the evidence presented, Victor said, the promotion committee will postpone its recommendation indefinitely. Mr. Crowe, you are suspended pending a formal investigation. Please surrender your badge and company devices to HR before leaving the building. Ethan stood slowly, as if his legs were not fully cooperating. He looked at me one last time, and I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before, the recognition of complete and total defeat. Security arrived to escort him out. The door closed behind him. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Victor Langston turned to me. Cole, I owe you an apology. This should never have happened. Thank you, I said. The promotion committee will reconvene next week once the investigation has progressed. I want you to know that your handling of this situation, the documentation, the composure, the focus on facts rather than accusations, has demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we need in senior leadership. I nodded. The days following Ethan's suspension passed in a strange fog of normalcy disrupted by occasional bursts of unexpected attention. People who had never spoken to me before suddenly found reasons to stop by my desk, to ask about projects, to express belated appreciation for work I had done years ago. I understood what was happening. They were repositioning themselves, adjusting their social calculations now that the landscape had shifted. The man they had assumed would win had been removed from the game, and the man they had overlooked had become suddenly visible. I did not resent them for it. That was simply how the system worked. Oliver Finch was the only one who seemed genuinely pleased rather than strategically interested. He brought me coffee on Friday morning and sat at my desk for 20 minutes, asking nothing about the incident, talking only about technical matters and weekend plans and the small, comfortable rhythms of ordinary life. You know, he said as he was leaving, I always knew you were paying attention. Most people do not, but you do. It is a habit, I said. It is more than that. He paused at the edge of my workspace, looking back. You are the kind of person who sees things clearly. That is rare, and it matters. The investigation proceeded through the following week. I was interviewed twice by HR, once by the legal team, and once by an external investigator retained to ensure objectivity. I answered every question precisely and completely, providing additional documentation when requested, maintaining the same calm composure that had defined my presentation in the conference room. Ethan, I learned, had initially attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, a practical joke that had been blown out of proportion. But the security footage was unambiguous, and the paper trail I had created left no room for alternative explanations. By Wednesday, his suspension had been converted to termination for cause. I found out through an official email from Victor Langston's office, sent to all department heads and senior staff. The language was formal and restrained, referring only to a violation of company policies regarding workplace safety and professional conduct. But everyone knew what it meant. Ethan Crowe was gone. I sat at my desk reading the email, and I allowed myself a single moment of satisfaction, a brief internal acknowledgement that the system had, in fact, worked as it was supposed to work, not because it cared about justice, but because it cared about liability, not because it valued me, but because it needed to protect itself, but the result was the same. The promotion review reconvened on Thursday of the following week, the same executive conference suite, the same committee members, but this time with a notably different atmosphere. Marianne Doyle was present again, as was Victor Langston, but the tension of the previous meeting had been replaced by something closer to formality. "Cole," Victor began, "I want to be direct with you. The events of the past 2 weeks have been unusual for this company, and your role in them has been significant. The committee has reviewed your performance record, your contribution history, and your handling of recent events." He paused, and I waited. "We are prepared to offer you the senior operations leadership position, effective immediately. The salary and benefits package is outlined in this document." He slid a folder across the table. "Take some time to review it and let us know if you have questions." I opened the folder. The numbers were significantly higher than I had expected. Not just a promotion, but a recognition that the company needed to demonstrate its appreciation in concrete terms. "Thank you," I said. "You earned this, Cole, not by playing politics or positioning yourself strategically, but by doing the work and maintaining your integrity under pressure. That is exactly what we need in this role." I closed the folder and placed my hands on the table. "I accept." The committee members nodded, documents were signed, handshakes were exchanged. It was all very formal and proper, the machinery of corporate acknowledgement proceeding through its established procedures. When I returned to my desk, there was a message waiting from an unknown number. I opened it expecting congratulations, or perhaps a message from someone who had heard the news through the office grapevine. Instead, it was from Ethan. "You think you won, but you did not expose me. I exposed myself. You just collected the receipts. That does not make you a winner. That makes you a bureaucrat." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it. He was right about one thing. I had not confronted him directly. I had not accused him publicly or demanded satisfaction in some dramatic showdown. I had simply gathered the evidence and presented it to the people who had the authority to act. But he was wrong about what that meant. A bureaucrat followed procedures because that was their job. I had followed procedures because that was how you used the system against people who thought they could game it. Ethan had trusted his charm, his positioning, his ability to manipulate perceptions, and I had trusted something simpler, the truth, documented and organized, presented to people who could not afford to ignore it. That was not bureaucracy, that was strategy. I went back to work. The transition into my new role took several weeks to complete. There were handoffs to coordinate, responsibilities to assume, relationships to establish with people who had previously seen me as background noise. I approached all of it with the same methodical patience that had defined my career. The office had changed, subtly but noticeably, since Ethan's departure. The atmosphere was less performative, less focused on the constant competition for visibility that had characterized the previous months. People seemed to be waiting, watching to see what kind of leader I would be. I showed them through work rather than words. When systems failed, I was there. When decisions needed to be made, I made them. When problems arose, I documented them carefully and addressed them systematically. It was not dramatic or charismatic, but it was effective. Oliver Finch became my closest ally in the department, not through any formal arrangement, but through the natural gravity of working well together. He had been right that day in the break room. The people who did the actual work knew who else did the actual work, and they responded when those people were finally given the authority to lead. The first month passed, then the second. The network ran smoothly, incidents were handled efficiently, and the department began to develop a reputation for reliability that it had not enjoyed in years. I was good at this job. Everyone could see it now, but there was still one piece of unfinished business. On a Tuesday evening in December, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a young woman, uncertain and apologetic. "Excuse me, is this Cole Harlow?" "It is." "My name is Diana. I was Ethan Crowe's assistant before he left the company. I found something in his old files that I think you should see." I listened carefully as she explained. During the transition of Ethan's responsibilities, she had been tasked with organizing his archived materials before transferring them to the new operations manager, me. In the process, she had discovered a folder of documents that appeared to be copies of internal communications, annotated with handwritten notes. "Some of them mention your name," she said. I am not sure, but I think he was planning something before the bar incident. Something bigger. Can you send me the documents?" "I already put them through the shredder. Company policy. But I thought you should know that what happened at the bar was not a random decision. He had been working on it for months." I thanked her for the information and ended the call. So, the drink switch had not been an impulsive mistake. It had been part of a longer game, a systematic campaign to remove me from competition through whatever means necessary. And if the bar incident had not worked, there would have been something else. A manufactured crisis, perhaps. A carefully orchestrated failure that would have been blamed on me. I had always suspected as much, but it was useful to have confirmation. I sat in my apartment that evening and thought about what Diana had told me. Ethan had planned, Ethan had strategized. Ethan had invested time and energy into undermining me because he saw me as a threat. In a strange way, it was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. I poured myself a drink, bourbon, straight, from a bottle I had opened myself, and raised it in an ironic toast to the absent competition. Then I set down the glass and went to bed. The work continued. That was what mattered. Winter settled over the city in shades of gray and white. The days grew shorter, the mornings darker, and the office took on the peculiar intensity of the end-of-year push. Budgets needed to be finalized, projects needed to be closed out, and everyone was trying to accomplish as much as possible before the holiday slowdown. I threw myself into the work with an energy I had not felt in years. Not because I had anything to prove that had been settled months ago, but because I genuinely enjoyed the challenge. The senior operations role gave me visibility into systems and processes I had only glimpsed before, and I found myself energized by the complexity of it all. The team responded well to my leadership style. I was not charismatic or inspirational in the way that Ethan had been. I did not give motivational speeches or organize team-building events, but I was present, consistent, and fair. I noticed when people did good work and said so. I took responsibility when things went wrong and worked to fix them. I treated everyone with the same quiet respect. It was not complicated, but apparently it was rare. By February, the department had hit every performance target for the quarter. Uptime was at an all-time high, incident response times had improved by 20%, and customer satisfaction scores were climbing steadily. Victor Langston mentioned it in a company-wide email, praising the operations team for their contributions to overall company success. My name was in that email, not as a footnote or an afterthought, but as a primary contributor. I read it at my desk and felt something that took me a moment to identify. Pride. Simple, uncomplicated pride in work well done. It had been a long time since I had felt that. Oliver Finch stopped by later that afternoon, a printout of the email in his hand. "Thought you might want a hard copy for your files," he said, grinning. I took it, folded it carefully, and placed it in my desk drawer alongside the other documentation I had collected over the years. "Thank you, Oliver. No problem." He paused, looking at me with the same thoughtful expression he had worn so many times before. "You know, I have been thinking about what you said a few months ago, about habits, about paying attention." "What about it?" "I think that is what separates the people who survive in places like this from the people who do not. Not talent, not intelligence, not even hard work, just the ability to see clearly and remember what you see." I nodded slowly. "That is part of it." "What is the other part?" I thought about the question, about the folder of documentation that still sat in my desk drawer, no longer needed but not yet discarded, about the security footage and the receipts and the carefully organized timeline, about the patience required to gather all of it and the discipline required to present it at exactly the right moment. "Timing," I said finally, "knowing when to act." Oliver considered this, then nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." He returned to his desk, and I went back to work. Spring arrived gradually, softening the harshness of winter into something more hopeful. The trees outside the office windows began to show the first hints of green, and the atmosphere on the floor grew lighter as people emerged from the seasonal darkness. I had settled into my new role completely by then, the last traces of novelty worn away by months of daily practice. The work was challenging and satisfying, the team was competent and motivated, and the company was performing well. By all external measures, I had achieved exactly what I had worked toward for more than a decade. But there was something else, something internal that had also shifted during those months. I had spent most of my career being overlooked, not actively mistreated. That was reserved for special cases like the bar incident, but simply ignored, passed over, treated as competent but unremarkable. It was the kind of invisibility that accumulated gradually, eroding confidence over years, making you question whether you were really as capable as you believed. The experience with Ethan had changed that, not because I had won, though I had, but because the winning had been on my own terms. I had not adapted to his style or adopted his tactics. I had simply been myself, consistently and completely, and the system had ultimately responded to that authenticity. It was validation I had not known I needed. I found myself thinking about it during quiet moments. In the car on the way to work, at my desk between meetings, late at night in my apartment when the city was silent outside my windows. The thoughts were not obsessive or triumphant, just a kind of settling, a gradual integration of everything that had happened. Victor Langston called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon in April. The CTO's office was on the top floor, a corner suite with panoramic views of the city and furniture that telegraphed senior authority. I had been here before, during the incident, during the promotion review, but never under circumstances that felt quite so routine. "Cole, sit down." Victor gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about the future." "Of course. I am retiring next year. The board has been asking me to identify potential successors, names to consider, people who might be ready to step up when the time comes." I waited. "I have been watching your work since you took over operations. The results have been excellent, better than excellent, honestly. But more than that, I have been watching how you work, the way you approach problems, the way you manage people, the way you handle pressure." He paused, looking at me directly. "You are on my list, Cole. Not at the top yet. There are people with more experience, more visibility, more traditional credentials, but you are on it. And I want you to know that because I think it matters for how you think about the next few years of your career." I let the words settle. CTO succession. My name on the list. It was not a promise or a guarantee, but it was an acknowledgement of possibility. The same kind of acknowledgement I had spent years waiting for but never received. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "You earned it." Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I have been at this company for a long time, Cole. I have seen a lot of people come and go, and I have learned that the ones who last are not always the ones who make the most noise. Sometimes they are the ones who just keep doing the work day after day until everyone else realizes they cannot do without them." I nodded. "That has been my approach. I know, and I want you to know that I see it. Even when it seemed like no one was watching, someone was." The meeting ended with a handshake and a promise to continue the conversation in the coming months. I walked back to my desk through the afternoon light, thinking about what Victor had said. Someone was watching, even when it seemed like no one was. That was the thing about patience. It paid off eventually, not always, not predictably, but often enough to make the waiting worthwhile. I returned to my work. The board meeting was scheduled for June. Victor had informed me a month earlier that I would be presenting a strategic update on network infrastructure investments, a high-visibility slot typically reserved for senior executives making their case for future priorities. It was not officially a succession audition, but everyone understood the subtext. The board wanted to see who Victor was grooming. They wanted to evaluate the candidates for themselves. I prepared meticulously, as I always did. Slides were refined through dozens of iterations. Data was verified and cross-referenced. Every potential question was anticipated, every challenge prepared for. I rehearsed the presentation alone in my apartment, speaking to empty walls, timing each section with military precision. The morning of the presentation arrived clear and bright, the summer sun flooding through the windows of the conference room where the board had assembled, 12 faces around a long table, most of them unfamiliar, all of them watching me with the careful attention of people who make decisions about other people's futures. Victor nodded from his seat at the head of the table. "Cole, the floor is yours," I began. The presentation unfolded smoothly, technical details translated into business implications, investment requirements justified with projected returns, risk factors acknowledged and mitigation strategies outlined. It was comprehensive, clear, and convincing, the culmination of everything I had learned in my years at this company. The board listened attentively. Some took notes. Some asked clarifying questions that I answered without hesitation. When I finished, there was a brief silence, the contemplative pause of people who had been given something worth considering. Then one of the board members, a silver-haired woman I recognized from the company's annual reports, spoke. "Mr. Harlow, I want to ask you something that is not in your slides." "Of course." "I have been reading about the situation with your predecessor in the operations role. The termination last year, the investigation. She paused, her expression neutral but probing. Tell me about that. The question hung in the air. I felt the attention of the room sharpen, focus narrowing on my response. This was the moment. Not the slides, not the data, not the carefully prepared arguments. This. I discovered that a colleague had deliberately placed an allergen in my drink at a company event, I said, keeping my voice level. I chose not to consume the beverage. I documented what happened. I presented the documentation to HR and allowed the company's investigation process to proceed. The investigation confirmed my account, and the individual was terminated. You documented it, she repeated. Yes, I believe in the importance of accurate records. And you chose not to consume the beverage. How did you know there was something wrong with it? I could smell it, and tree nuts. I am allergic. I have been vigilant about potential exposure my entire life. It has become instinctive. The board member nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. What you are describing requires significant discipline. The discipline to notice. The discipline to document. The discipline to trust the process rather than seeking immediate confrontation. Yes. And you believe that discipline is applicable to leadership at a higher level? I met her gaze directly. I believe that institutions respond to evidence. I believe that clear documentation and careful analysis are more effective than emotion or confrontation. And I believe that the same approach that worked in that situation can work in leading this company's technology strategy. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more significant. Then the silver-haired woman smiled. Thank you, Mr. Harlow. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. The meeting continued, but I already knew that something had shifted. The question had been a test, and I had passed it. Afterward, Victor walked me to the elevator, his hand on my shoulder. Cole. His voice was quiet but certain. I am going to recommend to the board that they place you at the top of the succession list. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and turned to face him. They had underestimated me, all of them, for years. They would not make that mistake again.